Hello and welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Bill Froehlich. This is our weekly roundup of some of the stories that have been making headlines here in northern Michigan. And at the table with me this week from Interlochen Public Radio is reporter Aaron Selbig. Aaron, thanks for coming in.
Hi, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good to have you back.
Good to be here.
Let's talk, start locally here in Traverse City with some of the news going on at the city government level. And you can share with us some of what happened at the most recent Traverse City Commission meeting.
Well, probably the most interesting thing to me anyway was the demise of the public pier. It appears to be, forgive me, dead in the water. But I almost used that in my news story. I decided against it. But it, it had seemed like it was shelved at a meeting in December, but then one of the new city commissioners brought it back. He was basically concerned that the city had spent all this money studying it. They had gotten an outside grant to study this pier. Now, let me back up. The pier is a big 500-some foot off of the mouth of the Boardman River. It would have extended into Grand Traverse Bay. Originally, it was called a fishing pier because you would have been able to fish off of it, but it was really, there was a little argument over how effective of a fishing spot it would be. But it definitely would have provided a viewing platform for tourists, and it would have been an attraction, I guess, more than anything, down there by Clinch Park. Anyway, this commissioner brought it back because he was concerned about that the city had spent all this money studying it, and then it just kind of fizzled and didn't go anywhere. But so they basically officially killed it at this meeting on Monday, and the reason it just didn't seem to generate excitement in the community. When it was introduced many months ago, we wondered that, is this going to catch on? Is this a thing that people want? Is it a thing that locals would be interested in? The Sport Fishing Association definitely supported it. But I
wanted to put in a fish cleaning station.
Right, yeah. But it just, I think the commissioners have a good point that the public just didn't seem to embrace it. So that's probably it for the public pier.
Yeah. I thought it was, Richard Lewis was the commissioner that wanted to advance that. And I thought there was a valid point to this whole argument of, we've already spent money on this. Let's
keep going.
See what, if anything, should come out of this.
Yeah.
Because that type of thing, we've seen that type of thing. I guess 8th Street is the example I'm thinking of. All the tens of thousands of dollars that have been spent on studies, and then here we are, basically, we haven't done anything to the lane configuration.
Restriping is about it.
It's all back to the way it was, and so in that sense, at least interesting that we were trying to advance the discussion on, again, monies that had already been spent, but like you said, it just...
It didn't catch on.
It seemed to generate a lot of buzz.
It did open that was an interesting conversation that they had Monday night about, where do you draw the line? The other side of the argument is, well, you have to spend money on studies just to see if it's a good idea or not. And I think some of the commissioners were making the point that, well, we did that. We took this grant money. It wasn't Traverse City money. It was a grant. And they spent it, and they did a study, and they had a beautiful drawing and all of this. And it just kind of fizzled out. I think you do have to, I think responsible government does have to draw the line somewhere and stop spending money. That was the conclusion they drew anyway.
And in theory, the geography won't change significantly.
No.
If we want, that drawing will still be valid in 10, 20, 30, 50 years.
Yeah.
If someone wants to bring it up again someday.
That's right. Maybe it'll come back. Well, it was one of the commissioners, I think it was Tim Warner, called it the zombie pier because it just won't die. That's a pretty good line.
Well, he was also at the center of another discussion that night, and that was this resolution to call on the closing of the Enbridge pipeline up in the Straits of Mackinac.
Yeah, he was the only one who voted no on that resolution. The resolution passed. It was Mayor Carruthers that put it forward. And now Traverse City's on a long and growing list of communities that are calling for the shutdown of Line 5 under the Mackinac Straits, which is a 62-year-old oil pipeline. Yeah. And a lot of people are, concerned about the potential environmental disaster if something happened to the pipe. And there's no question that if there was a spill, it would have pretty severe consequences.
It again raises a similar question of what is the role of city government. And I think that was part of Tim Werner's argument is, why are we getting involved in this? Why is any community taking a vote on this, especially as Tim Werner said, when we have other issues that maybe we should be passing resolutions and fighting for.
That's a fair point too. Is it the city's business to get involved in something like that, or? But Traverse City's not the only ones. There's a lot of communities that have done the same thing.
And maybe you remember. I don't remember what the other issues were that Commissioner Werner brought up. One of them was school funding. For something, he could say, I could support a resolution calling for more school funding.
Right.
And then I think there was another one as well. But that, that's a totally unrelated issue, obviously, which could be brought up again at any time. And then one commissioner said something to the effect of, well, then, we'll take a proposal from a school anytime. And on the one hand, I just thought, you didn't. Why wait for a school to come forward and say we want to help our schools? Why not have your city leaders say we want help for our schools too?
Yeah. So. Yeah. Well, that there's another thing going on. That with TCAPS is looking. They're going to decide next month whether to close 3 schools, and now there's I guess a growing movement. I don't know if they've done anything official yet, but on the old Mission Peninsula, those folks are discussing the legality of raising their own money to then basically give as a gift to TCAPS to keep their school open, the old Mission School there. There was a law passed in Michigan that, some folks think prevents that sort of thing, that local communities can't do that to fund their own school directly. The law was passed to kind of even the playing field so that it wasn't just the wealthy neighborhoods that had all of the, nice buildings and amenities and could keep their school open. But what they're talking about, like I said, is making a gift, I don't know how much money, X amount of money to TCAPS, in exchange for TCAPS keeping their neighborhood school open. There's a big question now. The question is going around: is that legal or not? Peter Payat, our news director at IPR, is following that story closely. So we'll see.
We'll see
what happens there.
Obviously I don't know the numbers, the enrollment, obviously, as well as the district does, but I can't just help but imagine what closing those 3 schools is going to do to the next nearest school on all sides in terms of their enrollment. Are we going to all of a sudden have this, problem at Eastern Elementary where they're too crowded now? Or, well, hey, now we have a full house at Eastern. We really need to spend money to revamp Eastern. And then that's going to get the old Mission parents saying, why are you spending money here when you just shut us down? Or, I'm just playing devil's advocate and forecasting all the next arguments and problems that will come out of this, because there will be many, I think.
It does seem strange, and in a county that's growing like Grand Traverse County, as it growing, modestly, I guess you could say. It's true. I mean, the superintendent Paul Soma and the district are right that the school numbers are declining at these schools, but you got to think long term that maybe that would right itself. I don't know how you would predict something like that. I'm sure those folks, have methods of doing that. But I know that's what a lot of folks in Interlochen is one of the schools. What they are thinking is that long term it might turn itself around. So
what is the next closest school for Interlochen?
They're saying that well, it's kind of strange. The closest school might be Blair Elementary in Grawn, but that's not where TCAPS wants to send those kids. They want to send them to Silver Lake, and the other one, I believe it's Westwood, which is Westwood Long is Lake, just north of there. Yeah, Long Lake area. Those are the 2 that they want to divert Interlochen students.
Well, none of those schools directly affect me, but as a parent, I can feel the frustration. I can see the frustration.
Well, Bill, I should
not only that, but you're not going to let me go to the next closest school. Now I have to go to 2 schools farther away.
I should lay out on the table right now that this does affect me. I have a son at Interlochen Elementary School, and I have not been reporting on this for IPR at all because of that.
Sure.
I've been staying away from it. Like I said, My news director, Peter, has been following some of it. Our other reporters, David Castleman and Morgan Springer, have been following the story. I've had to back off because it does directly affect me. And yeah, it's just kind of, I'll be honest, as a parent, it's frustrating. You know, we've just moved back to Michigan about a year and a half ago, and now we're looking at the possibility of having to uproot our third grader and send him to another school, and that's, gosh, not exactly what we had in mind.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you.
Yeah.
One thing I wish someone would talk about, whether that's in the media or even within the school district, and I've asked Paul Soma this, is these boundary lines of where families have to send their kids, based on where you live. And in my case, we send one student to a school that's, I don't know, 4 or 5 miles away, not terribly far, but it's not the closest school to us. We've got a school right up the road, a half a mile away, but because of where the district boundary lines are for residents, we can't send our kid there. They have open enrollment. We could do that if we could take care of transportation on our own.
Right.
But they don't provide the bus service a mile up the road, but they'll take us 4 miles away.
That is a little strange.
And I can't help but think that in some way, shape, or form would affect all of the enrollment numbers at all the schools. Interlochen, Old Mission, any of them.
Well,
that you say, okay, well, let's look at the actual, what would it take to get those numbers up? Well, maybe if you redrew the lines 2 streets over and let the kids who live closest go there, maybe your school enrollment would be all right.
And
I don't know the answer to that, but it just seems like that question has never been addressed, and that's always bothered me.
That's a good question. You know, a lot of people take their children to the school that's closest to where they work. You know, I think that's the case for, I'm not sure what the numbers are, but I know some folks who work at the Interlochen Center for the Arts have their kids enrolled at Interlochen School because, you know, if something happens, you want to be there. You know, so, and honestly, like I said, I'm personally involved. I probably shouldn't even be discussing this too much as a reporter, but it's a good school. You know, it's an old school, but I've been happy with it. The teachers there are good. They have the IB program, the International Baccalaureate program, which has been very good for my son. He's speaking to me in Spanish, and you know, it's been good for him. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
Yep. All right. Anything else? Did we forget anything on the Traverse City News agenda?
I don't think so. It's been a little quiet lately.
Yep.
Traverse City. Maybe it's the February doldrums. I don't know, but maybe they're so tired of arguing over the 9-story building. Oh, there was that.
Oh, that did come up again.
Yeah, that came up again too. They approved the payment in lieu of taxes for the developers of the River West 9-story building, which was, you know, expected, I guess. They're not going to get very far with that project without that. They need that. It's basically what it amounts to is a tax break from Traverse City to get their funding from MISHDA for providing affordable housing. But they finally put a number on it, and I believe it was 64 affordable housing units are going to be, they're saying.
Included in that?
Yeah.
Have we gotten the definition yet of affordable in this case?
Not exactly. I think it's if I remember right, it's a percentage. But as far as a dollar amount, I don't know. We'll see. That I think the word affordable is kind of subjective.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we've had that discussion here before as well.
Yeah.
Well, let's turn our attention to things north in Harbor Springs. You had a great story, which is now the top story on your website at Interlochen Public Radio. And we'll play a little bit of audio for us in just a second here for the listener or the viewers. But just set this up for us. What's the story, and then we'll give it a listen.
Well, I got to give credit to the local reporters in Harbor Springs at the local paper there and the Petoskey News Review. This is a story they've been covering. I didn't know much about it until a few weeks ago, but it's about the Harbor Springs Deer Park.
Which I didn't even know.
You ever been there? Did you know that was there? Neither did I.
And I've lived here 13 years and I've never...
It's been around since the 1940s. 70 plus years it's been there. Basically what it is right behind the City Hall building in Harbor Springs, there's about a 2-acre fenced-in little park, and they have a herd of deer in there. Right now there's, I believe, 6 deer in there. And you can go, it's free, you can park your car, you can walk up to the fence, And Bill, it is the weirdest thing. You go up there, and the deer, they'll be all laying around the park, but as soon as they see you, they get up and they'll come right up to you. People feed them carrots and whatever. They'll lick your hand. They'll stick their snout through the fence and they'll lick your hand, and it's about as close to a live deer as you're ever going to get. Right. It's kind of cool, and a lot of people, they consider it a tradition. I had one guy tell me it was part of Harbor Springs heritage. He'd been going there since he was a kid. He takes his kids there now, and but yeah, that's it. On the other side of it, there are some people over the last few years who have been advocating to close the park down, and it has to do with the city's methods of controlling the herd. So, yeah.
That's the story.
Yeah.
Well, let's listen. This is Aaron Selbig from IPR with his story on that deer park in Harbor Springs.
Hey, buddy. How are you?
The Harbor Springs Deer Park is about as close to deer as you're ever going to get. As soon as you walk up to the chain link fence, you'll have 2 or 3 or 4 curious deer come right up to you, looking for food or just wanting to lick your hand.
They are really practically tame.
They are very much tame.
Janice Elliot has been coming to the deer park for years.
I would probably come 2 to 3 times in the summertime and feed them and interact with them, not thinking past that.
One morning 5 years ago, Elliot made an unplanned visit to the deer park.
I was heading down East Hill, and I looked over and I saw 2 men with hunting caps on, orange hunting caps.
The men had rifles and were running around the south side of the deer park. As Elliot pulled into the parking lot to try to figure out what was going on, the men started shooting at the deer.
One buck in particular with a huge set of antlers was throwing himself against the fence, trying to get away from the bullets and trying to release himself.
And that's just a small portion of your story on that.
That's what kicked it off. That woman, Janice Elliot, that you heard there, she witnessed that scene. It turned out that those guys with the rifles were employed by the city. And, this had been going on for years, but nobody really knew much about it. But that was the way they controlled the herd. They would come in every so often when the herd, had gotten too big, and they would shoot some of the does, and then they would take the meat to the local food project and feed needy families in the area. And when Janice Elliot witnessed this, she like she said, she was sad about it, and she decided to do something about it. She started a campaign. That campaign has built momentum, and then it was publicized, this method of culling the herd. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people in Harbor Springs didn't like that. So, and this was about 5 years ago. So they've tried a couple things since then. They tried this. This is probably something else you've never heard about. They tried deer contraception, evidently, and this was on the recommendation of the Humane Society. They darted the does with this contraception, but for a variety of reasons, it didn't work, and the herd kept growing. Last year, they were up to 21 deer in this 2-acre fenced-in park. The DNR recommends no more than 6 deer. So what the city is doing now, and this has probably exacerbated the controversy, they've made a deal with a deer breeder in Gaylord, an outfit called Storm's End Whitetails, and basically Storm's End Whitetails is now managing the herd. They went in and they took all those 21 deer out, they replaced them with 6 deer, 5 does and 1 buck, and they're going to keep coming in and keeping the herd at that level. Now the problem, with folks like Janice Elliot and these other activists, is that they accuse Storm's End of selling their deer to canned hunts, where you have a bunch of deer in a fenced-in area and you allow hunters to come in and hunt them. And of course, some of the deer from the deer park, like I said in the story, they're pretty tame. They'll come up and lick your hand. So there's an issue over how sporting that is. Mm-hmm. Even some of the people who want to keep the deer park open have a problem with this new plan. So it has become it's really divided the town. It's a pretty big argument. The city council decided a couple of weeks ago to put it on the November ballot. So when we're all voting for a new president, they're going to vote also whether to close the deer park or not.
Any discussion or theory of just saying, all right, well, let's just let the deer go, let them back into the wild?
I don't think you can do that with these deer. I don't think they'd last very long. My understanding is the does that are there now, provided by Storm's End, were bottle fed and raised by humans. And I don't think it's my understanding that deer that are bottle fed and raised by humans cannot be released into the wild. Yeah.
Not to sound morbid or anything, of course, but it sounds like no matter what method we use, they don't stand a chance anyway.
Yeah.
They're going to a preserve, they're staying there,
or they'll be
getting
shot
off, they're being, regardless.
I think that's accurate, yeah.
I wonder if there's something else between now and November, and I know there's time, I'm sure, for more or different ballot proposals, but some other option other than the two extremes of leave it open, shut it down. Maybe somewhere in the middle we have different solutions for managing the population or different ideas.
I don't know, but if you come up with one, Bill, I'm sure Harbor Springs would love to hear it.
Well, and I'm sure they've had many suggestions. Obviously, this is the first time I'm hearing of it, but
yeah.
No,
the
two extremes just seem.
I don't know. Another element to this is, I think a lot of folks. I know Janice Elliot, the woman you heard in that piece of tape. She just generally has a problem with these types of little zoos, I think, I wasn't living in Traverse City, but I think the same kind of argument was happening over the Clinch Park Zoo when it was there. Is it ethical to have these animals? They're not rescue animals, they're not orphaned or rescue animals. They're just, wild animals that are put on display for people. And I've looked into it a little bit, and these sorts of deer parks, there used to be lots of them all over Michigan and all over the country, and now there aren't anymore. It's sort of the trend has swung the other way that, maybe that's not the best thing to do with wild animals. It's one point of view anyway.
Right, yeah, well, we'll keep following that one, or you will at least, so we'll be interested in how that turns out. We only have a few more minutes. I want to hit on two more stories, so let's real quickly talk about one that's going on across the pond there in Milwaukee suburb of Waukesha, Wisconsin, as it affects our Great Lakes. I'll take a couple quick minutes to talk about what the city of Waukesha wants to do. Waukesha
wants to take water from Lake Michigan, and they are, without getting too into the weeds, they are allowed under the Great Lakes Compact. The Great Lakes Compact forbids any water from the Great Lakes from leaving the Great Lakes Basin. Waukesha is right on the edge of the Great Lakes Basin, and they have a problem with their water supply. They have radium in their water supply, which has been getting worse and worse over the years. So they want to run a pipeline to connect to Milwaukee, which gets Lake Michigan water. They'll return all of the water, they say, back to Lake Michigan, treated, of course. It would be the first major exception made under the Great Lakes Compact, and what has to happen is all of the governors of the Great Lakes states, including Governor Snyder, of course, will have to vote, and it'll have to be unanimous for them to get this. So it's in the early stages right now. There's going to be a public hearing in Lansing next week on this, and folks who are interested around here can stream that hearing. But it's going to be interesting to see. This is a first test. A lot of people think that if Waukesha gets this water diversion, I'm gonna hit you with a pun again. It'll open the floodgates. Yep. Sorry, I've been doing that this morning. And there'll be other communities that'll want the same thing. I've heard even South Bend, Indiana might be interested. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. It's an environmental fight, but Waukesha's, they've done everything they've been asked to do so far, so it'll be interesting to see if they get it or not. All right. And then the last story here in the last 5 minutes or so is something going on in healthcare. Yeah. This is a story you've been working on for a couple of months. It sounds like trying to unravel the details. Any healthcare story is going to require some level of unraveling, and this one's been a little complicated. basically what's happened, this is happening all over the country, as a result of the Affordable Care Act and a lot of rule changes coming from the federal government, the role of nonprofit hospitals is changing. And this includes Munson. I talked to some folks in Munson and they told me about this. Basically, hospitals are now expected to take on more of a public health role. They are expected by the federal government to go out in their communities, identify severe public health problems, and then try to do something about it. And it starts with a thing called a health needs assessment, which is basically a survey that they have to do every 3 years. Munson did one back in 2013, and they identified a few things, but at the top of the list was maternal smoking, the number of pregnant women who smoke. And around here, those numbers are astronomically high. Michigan has a high rate, about 20%. In Kalkaska County, the rate is 41% of pregnant women smoke, which compared to the national average is just, it's a real issue. So for the last 2.5, 3 years, Munson has been trying to do something about that. They've done outreach to healthcare providers. They came up with a new brochure. They saw that a lot of the materials that were related to smoking were kind of outdated, so they came up with some new stuff. They've talked to a lot of women. But the thing is, there really isn't any way right now for the federal government to, they're not coming back and checking on the progress. There isn't a lot of accountability right now in that. So these hospitals are expected to make a dent in these big picture problems, public health problems, but nobody's really checking to see if they do it. In New Jersey, the state's getting involved, and the state is threatening to pull hospitals' tax exemption status if they don't prove that they're, but that's not happening as far as I can tell anywhere in Michigan, at least not yet. And I'm told by the experts who follow this sort of thing that the rules will catch up eventually, but right now hospitals find themselves in the kind of an interesting predicament. The whole philosophy of nonprofit hospitals is really shifting right now to a powerful degree.
Different sort of, I don't know, community outreach
that
they haven't necessarily done before.
No, nonprofit hospitals before, and the basic argument from the federal government is this. Because of the Affordable Care Act, millions more people now have health insurance who didn't used to. The role of nonprofit hospitals used to be that they would cover those people, indigent people, people who didn't have health insurance. Now, in theory, there's less of those people, so hospitals basically have more time and resources on their hands. So now the federal government wants them to, to do these needs assessments, to identify public health problems, and to try to do something about it. And I will say, I believe that Munson's been doing these even before it was required. I do think Munson takes it seriously. I think they have given it the old college try to do something about maternal smoking. But at the same time, it's kind of, I have some sympathy for the kind of confusing situation they're in right now.
Sure.
So.
And as you walked in the building, we talked about this before we sat at the table here. I've noticed in the last few months that community effort or that discussion, whether or not it was directly Munson or some other group, but smoking while pregnant. I mean, that's been PSA I've heard on the radio before. So people out watching right now, you may hear more about that in the months to come.
You probably will, because it's not just Munson. There are other health departments and health care services that are trying to tackle the same problem. That's another part of it. This whole federal thing is they want different entities, hospitals, county health departments, nonprofits to team up and work together. And it seems like that is happening, that they are talking more. And healthcare used to be more in silos, and now they're all, in theory, working together a little bit better. So.
Very good. Well, Aaron, thanks for being with us. I really appreciate the time. Give us your website again so folks can check out the deer herd story in full, or any of the other stories on IPR.
iprnews.org is where you go, and there's some cute deer pictures on there for you.
Very good. Aaron Selbig is our guest today, and we'll see you next time on The Brief Room, everyone. Thanks for joining us.